Won't you take back an old head-chopping fool?
Of course, Your Majesty. Let me just fluff your pillow for you. See ya in hell, fat man!
I'm ready. Are you?
It's the right microphone, definitely the right microphone, because I don't want to go through like an hour's worth of audio and then suddenly find out it's been recording on the wrong microphone. Alan has something to say. Does he want to say something? He says, we're having morning laps. Alan cannot live without his morning laps. And I completely understand, because after 3 weeks without my lovely, fluffy boy, I cannot understand how people get through the day without a cat coming to sit on their lap in the morning. It's a wonderful feeling. So this is my third attempt at recording this audio. Yesterday just wasn't working for some reason. There was a lawnmower or a wood chipper going off like a few doors down, so it was picking up on the audio, making the microphone just be an arsehole. And then I just thought, nah, sod it, I'm just gonna wait till tomorrow, because tomorrow is another day. So Firebrand. Firebrand is a movie I've been waiting 2.5 years to come out and watch, and oh my god, why did we have to wait for so long? So we had like the announcement of the movie, or like news that the movie had gone to like development in like March 2022. I know that because I did that unscripted video a while back, and like the news had just come out that rather than Michelle Williams playing Catherine Parr, she was being played by Alicia Vikander. And Jude Law was playing Henry VIII, and we doubted him, and I'm saying that I'm glad that I was wrong, but we'll get to that. So the film came out at Cannes last year. There was a clip released online like May-ish, and then finally there were trailers and the movie was released sparingly in America this June. And for some reason, even though this is a movie about British history, we Brits did not get it until last week. I'm just like, I do not understand the logic behind this movie's distribution. I know they're probably going to send it to streaming very, very soon, probably Amazon Prime. I think there's been news it's going to be on Amazon Prime. Key point is, it'll show up online eventually. I went to go see it on Friday. I think it was like the first screening at that cinema. It was Broadway cinema, so it was a 4:30 screening. There might have been a 12:30 screening, but when my mum said, hey look, Firebrand's finally at the cinema, do you want to go see it? I said, yes, we'll go see it on Friday afternoon. I was really hoping that I could film a sort of vlog, as it were, where we would go to the Broadway like an hour beforehand, and then we could go and get lunch and like have a royale with cheese and a lime and soda. So I wanted to do that, and then we go in, watch the movie, and then afterwards we go to the Lord Roberts and we talk about our thoughts on the film while I was recording them on my phone, but didn't happen this time. Things happen. But the point is, I finally managed to see this movie that I've been waiting longer for than I have for when I wanted to see Six the Musical. Because remember, I had to wait 2 years to see Six the Musical because of the pandemic. I can hear sirens in the background. I'm not sure if they're actual sirens or if someone's playing with like a toy fire truck or something. I really need to look into soundproofing this room. Anyway, I made a rough layout of what to talk about this movie. So let's start with talking about the plot. Spoilers ahead, pretty big spoilers, bigger than Henry himself. I had to go there.
In a rotten, blood-soaked island kingdom, there once was a queen by the name of Catherine Parr.
So the movie of Firebrand, I think it's the first movie about a wife of Henry VIII that isn't Anne Boleyn. Like, solely about that one wife. It's not about Henry, it's about the wife. Because we haven't actually gotten that from Henry's 4 other wives. So obviously there's not going to be a solo movie about Jane Seymour or Anne of Cleves. Probably not even with Catherine Howard, even though I still fantasize about that inevitable Sofia Coppola Catherine Howard movie. I really, really want that. It was based on a book by Elizabeth Fremantle called Queen's Gambit. But obviously because there's a series on Netflix called Queen's Gambit, they couldn't call it Queen's Gambit, so they call it Firebrand. But there is literally no resemblance to the book. Like, literally none. All the weird stuff that happened in the book, like Thomas Seymour and Catherine Parr getting it on a sundial, stuff like that, that's not here. Instead, The entire story takes place in the last months of Henry VIII's reign, and Catherine Parr, who is regent at the start of the movie, is trying to keep everything together. Canonically, the entire film takes place in Derbyshire at Haddon Hall. They don't acknowledge that they're staying in Haddon Hall, but they're using Haddon Hall as the setting. And in my notes, because it's Haddon Hall where they film Princess Bride and 3 adaptations of Jane Eyre, I put in my notes, Catherine of Aragon is locked in the attic, LOL. And canonically they are in Derbyshire because the plague has driven everyone of significance out of London. And Derbyshire is far enough, but I think they just kind of wanted somewhere gothic-ish to film, and Haddon Hall is the place. Because it's in the middle of the Peak District and there's lots of foresty, hilly areas to film surrounding bits. Because at the start of the movie there's like this eerie beginning which even includes a shot of these rocks that you see in the 2005 Pride and Prejudice movie with Keira Knightley standing on the edge. Obviously it's from a different angle, different weather. It stops me from doing that thing that I usually do in these things where they're clearly filming in the middle of nowhere and then they say we're going to the village, and it's just like, it's not the village, it's London. So it starts with Catherine is holding court at Haddon Hall with Elizabeth and Edward under her care. Mary is not there yet. While Henry is away in France fighting the French, Catherine is regent and trying to keep everything together. One very chilly morning, Catherine prepares to go and see Anne Askew, who is preaching nearby. She manages to get deniability by saying that she and her 2 ladies in waiting, one of whom is Catherine Willoughby, I think the other one is Eleanor Brown, because they're referred to her as Ellen. They say they're going to a shrine of St Mary and say that only women are allowed at the shrine, so the guards can't follow her. And she goes to see Anne Askew, who is preaching at this sort of village or commune or something nearby. And it turns out Catherine and Anne Askew know each other very well, and they haven't seen each other for 7 years, so that would put them in about 1539, so that's when Catherine would have been in her 2nd marriage. So it's possible they met at that time. It's more likely they met during Catherine's 1st marriage, where Anne would have been like 9 years old. If there is a possibility that Anne Askew and Catherine met, it's probably during the time when Catherine was up north. So Catherine tells Anne to be very, very careful about what she's doing because she is very much in danger of being executed for heresy. Anne tells her, you're the queen though, you have so much influence, you've just been able to publish a book under your own name. Later on, during a second meeting, Catherine gives Anne a necklace which was initially a gift from Henry, it's like a check-off necklace. Basically tells her to use it to get out of the country or escape or just survive a little bit longer. But that necklace will come back. Then they're in a Privy Council meeting. Edward is in the Privy Council meeting, he's got his dog with him. Catherine is in the Privy Council meeting. She's wearing the dress that was in that very famous portrait of hers where she's wearing the red dress with the hat, and it's just like, oh my god, I have longed to see that costume like in a Tudor drama. I've seen them obviously in documentaries, but like, oh my god, they're actually using the costumes properly, it's wonderful. And Edward's got his dog, and I thought, oh my god, if they go further with the Thomas Seymour story, like, is that the same dog that Thomas Seymour shoots? Maybe? At some point the dog gets on the table. So while Catherine is basically putting in a lot of effort to try and assert her authority as regent, a lot of the men are talking over her, and then literally the moment someone comes in and says, the king's back, all the men get up and leave the room, with Catherine just sort of sitting there like, WTF. So the second there's a sign of male authority, the men leave the women. I like that the commentary isn't too in your face, it's very much like relatable in that sort of feeling. It's like the equivalent of when you're in a board meeting and the token woman has an idea, everyone ignores her, then another male person on the board says the exact same thing the woman just said and they give him credit for it. So Henry's back from the wars and we are introduced to Jude Law's Henry. Honestly, I think this Henry VIII stepped right out of the days of Keith Michelle. This is a type of Henry we haven't seen in a very long time. And they do pay a lot of attention to his leg ulcers, which were very, very bad at this time. Like, this guy could barely walk. I'm trying to think of like the last Henry VIII we've got. Obviously, Spanish Princess didn't acknowledge it because this was before the big jousting accident. They haven't referenced it in Wolf Hall, I don't think. Like, they probably will in the second series of Wolf Hall, which is coming out eventually. The Tudors, I remember, because they couldn't find a way to make Jonathan Rhys-Meyers look fat without him actually gaining weight, they just paid a lot of attention to his leg ulcer and lots of gore about that. But I think this one's even grimmer because there's so much pus and one of the main doctors is a Spanish doctor who came over with Catherine of Aragon. So a lot of Henry's leg ulcer scenes are coupled with Henry and Catherine's more intimate scenes. Jude Law decided, I'm going to smell like literal fecal matter and sweat and decay in order to amp up the realism, even though we can't smell it unless we get one of those Spy Kids 4 scratch and sniff cards to take in the movie with us. But I think that's probably one way of making sure that you can get a good take, to make sure that she's not bursting out laughing when... Because these scenes show Henry, even though he's like very unhealthy, in a lot of pain, and looks like he is 30 seconds away from a heart attack at all times, he insists on being the one on top. Catherine never goes on top. I think that's part of Henry's desperation to assert his masculinity, and somehow out of all this Catherine manages to get pregnant. But before we get to that, we'll get to Anne Askew. During a falconry scene, obviously it's another metaphor, there's so many metaphors in this, of, you know, these beautiful strong birds being held down by men. And Catherine is told by Edward Seymour, like both Seymour brothers are in this, and they have these great big bushy beards. Edward Seymour, played by Eddie Marsan, not Eddie Redmayne. No more Tudor dramas for Eddie Redmayne. Eddie Marsan as Edward Seymour tells Catherine that Anne Askew has been arrested, tortured and burned. And Catherine's like, she was gentry, she shouldn't have been tortured. And he says, well, it happened, and apparently even though this woman was tortured on the rack and literally unable to move, she somehow managed to sew gunpowder into the lining of her clothes, so when they burned her she exploded. And of course Catherine's very upset about that. Henry sees from a distance that she's upset about something, and she gathers her courage and confronts Henry about Anne Askew's burning, and he gets incredibly threatening. Before he's holding a hawk in one, he pulls her down to get her violent, like interrogates her, like trying to figure out if she has anything to do with her, to do with her. Catherine lies, saying, I haven't seen her in a long time, she was just a friend of mine, I was very upset to find out that she was burned. And then in this scene, it's the perfect depiction of someone undergoing domestic abuse trying to make everything look okay and seem okay, that maybe somehow she'll believe it. She immediately starts helping the servants with clearing a table, trying to get everything tidied up. She said, no, everything's fine, everything's perfect, everything's fine. Even though her ladies in waiting are both telling her, like, calm down, you don't have to worry about this is what the servants do. And then there's another scene where Henry's forcing Catherine to pray in Latin, and while she's praying he sticks his fingers in her mouth. It's a way of showing coercion without actually showing coercion. Makes you very uncomfortable, and it's sort of showing it without having to show it, which I think is a pretty good idea. But it also shows that literally every time Catherine tries to speak, Henry stops her, and this is building to something. So Catherine later finds out that she's pregnant. The entire court is excited about this. Edward is excited to get a new brother, although he says, like, if I have a brother, will you love him more? And she says, no, I will love you both the same. And Henry feels validated in his masculinity now. But then there's a festival, and Thomas Seymour shows up. He had a scene at the beginning of the film where he was talking to Catherine about Anne Askew, and then he says he's got to go back to Antwerp, but now he's back from Antwerp. But obviously the presence of Thomas Seymour, it could not be more emasculating, because Catherine has just said, oh, I wish we could dance, to Henry. But Henry can't dance, and she's literally just reminded him that he is feeble. So seeing Thomas Seymour, he forces Catherine and Thomas to dance, and then Catherine and Thomas, like, they whisper something about Anne Askew, and Henry immediately gets jealous and thinks that they're lovers, and the second that they're alone together, Henry accuses Catherine of cheating on him with Thomas and saying, are you like the others? Obviously, like Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard. Forewarning, there is a bum. You do see you see Henry's bare ass. That isn't actually Jude Law's ass. I thought it was a fat suit. It's not a fat suit. Jude Law struggles to gain weight for this role, so they got a stunt butt. They got a butt double.
What? Oh, hey, it's not really me. I used a stunt butt.
But then we do get a scene, and huge trigger warning for SA for this scene. Henry beats Catherine down to the floor. Like, she tries to escape him, but he sort of like drags her by her legs onto the floor, and he tries to force himself on her, but Catherine sort of fights back in this way. She sort of reaches around, grabs his ulcered leg, and it causes like a huge spike of pain. He collapses. She doesn't tell the doctors like what he tried to do to her. She said that he fell, and Henry collapses into a fever. But then Catherine, because of Henry beating her, she miscarries, and it's a very upsetting scene. She's like trying to force the baby not to fall out of her, as it were. And of course Henry is completely furious that Catherine miscarried, even though it's his fault. And this leads to him shutting Catherine out, and him and Gardner looking for a way to get rid of her. And thanks to this Spanish doctor who does not like Henry because of what he did to Catherine of Aragon, there is also another Spanish character in this. There's a lady in waiting to Lady Mary. I can't remember her name, but she's like the only black character in the movie, but she has a brief scene with Catherine telling her about Catherine of Aragon, what Henry did to her, and they don't blame Anne Boleyn for literally any of this. She says that both she and Mary later on say that Henry slowly poisoned Catherine of Aragon and put her in these horrible prisons, these estates that were basically prisons, until she died slowly and painfully. Both this doctor and the lady in waiting have held a grudge against Henry ever since. So this doctor, having overheard that Henry and Gardner want to get rid of Catherine by any means necessary, much like as in the account by John Fox, Catherine gets this tip and she and her ladies burn every heretical piece of writing that they have. But unfortunately, the one loose end is that necklace. And Thomas Seymour says that the necklace is in Antwerp, Belgium, Germany, one of those things. And he promises Catherine that he's managed to find it and it's on its way back so she can spare herself. Unfortunately, when leads to trying to condemn Catherine run dry, Henry threatens Edward Seymour with never being able to see his nephew again, in which Edward Seymour won't be in the right place to make himself regent of England. And even though Henry loudly proclaimed that Catherine should be regent when he dies, if he dies before Edward reaches his majority, the Seymours obviously, they want the power. And in a scene that sort of shows Thomas's scumminess without being really super creepy, he reluctantly gives the Anne Askew necklace to Edward Seymour for him to hand over to the king. It's a scene that shows that Thomas will claim he loves Catherine, but he will choose himself over her. Foreshadows how unhappily their marriage ended. So yeah, Henry and Gardner have their evidence, and Catherine and her two ladies in waiting are arrested and imprisoned. But not before Henry shoves the Anne Askew necklace in Catherine's mouth, because he just loves shoving things in her mouth. So Catherine is locked in the basement, like a dungeon basement. Obviously I got very confused about this. I was just like, at some point they're going to wake up and it's going to be all a dream, right? And then Catherine's going to be able to defend herself in time to avoid being arrested. Like, this is all just like a nightmare, right? But of course, because they're still canonically in Derbyshire, they're still canonically in Haddon Hall, Catherine isn't in the Tower of London in a dungeon. So there's that at least. I don't have to bitch about that. After several days and a slight rebellion from his children, like Henry is literally now on his deathbed, like he's inches away from death, seconds away. He summons Catherine from prison. Mary's lady in waiting dresses her, and Catherine thinks she's on her way to an execution. She comes into the courtyard and she's directed very slowly into the actual building. She walks past a pyre. It's there in the courtyard. There's an executioner holding a torch. That might have been in Catherine's head. I think it was in Catherine's head because she thinks, if I can't convince the king to spare my life, then I am literally going to be executed. She more likely would have been beheaded rather than burned. Otherwise the rhyme would have gone divorce, beheaded, died, divorce, beheaded, fried. So she and Henry are left alone, and all the men clear out. They go out into the courtyard so no one can hear what they're saying. No one's there to rush in, not even a single manservant. Catherine approaches Henry and he asks, "Do you love me?" Catherine says, "I love my king," and at some point she kisses his forehead and he says, "That's not what I asked." And Catherine says, "Do you believe in hell?" He doesn't answer and she says, "I think we're both bound for it." And then Catherine kills Henry. She basically throws her entire body weight on top of him until he stops breathing. the camera focuses mostly on her face while Henry's face is in the background. You can see the life slowly drain from him. And then the moment he dies, she's like, what have I done? Oh, right. And she turns to him and she closes his eyes and she says, I've set myself free. She doesn't actually say it's like, this is all to be read in her face. And then there's an epilogue where, I think because of the help of this Spanish doctor who hates Henry, the entire court decides, oh yes, Henry just died of his many, many illnesses. And now Edward's the king and we're all better off for it. And the final scene is Catherine, she's now, like, they're still at Haddon Hall, but Catherine is out of the confines of the gardens of Haddon Hall. And Elizabeth comes down, she sees Catherine, who is like now free, as it were. And then Elizabeth smiles and breaks the fourth wall and she's like, she was a pretty cool gal, my stepmother. Oh yeah, I didn't mention Elizabeth's basically the narrator for the entire thing, but it's only like a prologue and an epilogue. It's pretty okay. And that's where the movie ends. And honestly, during that scene where Catherine is suffocating Henry, I thought, where is the bit where she wakes up and this was all a dream? Because this can't really be happening. But it's happening. Oh my god.
Catherine, I pray no one saw you there that day.
I believe that I was chosen by God to get the king to change his will.
Okay, so let's talk about character performances. Let me draw up the cast list so I don't forget who's who. We'll start with Catherine, obviously, because this is her movie. So apart from her very small role in Dark Crystal Age of Resistance, this is the first thing I've seen Alicia Vikander in since that awful Tomb Raider movie that came out in 2018. She wasn't awful in it, she just was not Lara Croft. That was not Lara Croft in that movie. I am convinced that the Tomb Raider movie was initially someone's Last Jedi fanfic, and then suddenly they were tasked with writing the Tomb Raider movie, so they just used their fanfic and changed the names. I had to rewatch my rankings video on Catherine Parr for this because I couldn't remember the order in which I'd put it. Obviously, Jolie Richardson was number 1, Rosalie Crutchley at number 2, Six at number 3, and what was it, The Royal Diaries at number 4? And I thought, from her performance alone, she's very well acted. She gets across Catherine's unending anxiety of being Henry's wife, and yet being so dedicated to this idea of religious reform, of freeing the word of God from the way that the Catholics gatekeep religion in some way, because the common people can't read Latin, and surely they deserve to know what the word of God says. She definitely gets off this person who's so talented, so dedicated, so full of potential, restricted by the manifestation of the patriarchy, which is Henry VIII. And she just wants to scream. And honestly, yeah, she was a pretty damn good Catherine Parr. I would probably put her number 3 or number 4, so above 6. Let's just say 6 walks so this Catherine could run. Catherine is filmed with lots of birds in cages in one scene. Obviously there's the scene with the falcons, where it starts a scene with the falcons being hooded and tied to whatever the hell falcons are carried on. But there's also a scene where she's waiting for Henry to wake up from his fever after the whole, I want to say brouhaha, because brouhaha is one of the production companies that made this movie.
He's the one who overreacted and started this whole brouhaha.
Brouhaha? You can't say things like brouhaha and not expect people to hit you.
There's a scene where Catherine is in a gallery, there's so many caged exotic birds, and then she's sort of like going back and forth in the room looking at the birds, and there's these orange birds, they match her dress, and she's looking at these dead flies or dead bees on her windowsill, and there's 4 of them, and I thought, oh, to represent the 4 dead wives of Henry VIII, because Anne of Cleves doesn't count. That's why I think thematically this was always going to build towards Catherine killing Henry, because with all this symbolism of Catherine being a caged bird, the 4 dead flies on the windowsill being the other 4 wives, the numerous times Henry's putting his hand over Catherine's mouth, he's sticking things in her mouth when she's trying to speak, him beating her, all that sort of stuff. Thematically, it could never build towards Catherine saying, I only wish to learn example from you and serve you, my lord, and him saying, we are friends again. That couldn't happen in this. Yeah, that's all I can say about this Catherine, but honestly, we need to head on to talking about Jude Law as Henry VIII. Oh my god, it has been so long since we got a memorable Henry VIII. We haven't had a Henry VIII shown this late in life in a while. Not since the Tudors, I don't think. Obviously, there was a different context. Like, we'd seen that Henry for 4 seasons, and before that there was Ray Winston for like 5 minutes, and then before that, I don't even know, but like I sort of wanted something to sort of recreate Keith Michel's Henry late in life, because we all know Keith Michel's Henry VIII was iconic, and I think that Jude Law must have done lots of research in how to do this role. I bet he must have watched all of Keith Michel's stuff. I honestly got very good vibes from him. Like, he's probably watched Charles Laughton as well, and maybe a few of the Shakespearean Henry VIII's, maybe something like that. But this is definitely shows a Henry that, despite this is a king who reigns with terror, he is a very insecure man. He's insecure about the fact that he can't walk properly. He's insecure about the fact that he doesn't have a second son to secure his lineage as his father did. He's insecure about his wife possibly seeing other men and outshining him. There's a really good scene to sort of show the way that the court fears Henry, so they will literally do his bidding. It's a scene where Lady Mary returns to court and Henry is asked by one of the courtiers to play something on the harpsichord, and that is actually Jude Law playing the harpsichord. He learned for this role. And he starts singing Pastime with Good Company, and then the court immediately starts to join in, and everyone has to join in. It is also like that scene in A Man for All Seasons where Henry jumps off the boat and he waits for his court to react, so he laughs and the court laughs with him, because they're all terrified. They will literally do anything that he does in order to keep their heads. But throughout the story, I think the court sort of begins to see Henry being more and more pathetic. So really, he's just a bully at the end of the day. It sort of starts where, while Catherine is imprisoned and Henry and his 3 kids are in the gallery together, Henry orders Edward to sing. Edward, obviously he's still scared of his father, but he says, "I want my mother." And then Henry says, "Don't be stupid, your mother is dead." And Elizabeth's just like he means Queen Catherine. We all want Queen Catherine. And this is a big moment for Elizabeth as well, because she's been terrified of her father. She even voices to Catherine at one point that she is convinced that Henry will execute her one day. And Edward overhears this and he's just like, "I really don't like my father." You read it in that poor boy's face. They really got the look and feel of Henry in this. So overall, one of the best Henrys we've seen in a very long time. Obviously we haven't got a Henry VIII rankings yet, but I'm going to put him up there. He's definitely on the higher end of the list. Definitely on par with Keith Michel and Charles Laughton. Right, move on to some of the other characters in the movie. Thomas Seymour and Edward Seymour, played by Sam Riley and Eddie Marsan. Really great to see their beards, because both their portraits show them with big beards. None of the other dramas ever show them with these beards, and I just think that was glorious in and of itself. But it also showed that these are 2 scheming brothers, and once they've gotten rid of every one of their enemies, they'll turn on one another. Simon Russell Beale played Stephen Gardner. Very intimidating villain there. Like, it took me a while for me to deduce that this was Gardner and not Cranmer. Cranmer is not here. Once again, Cranmer is pushed out. He's very much like his counterpart in the Tudors, whereas presents himself like a friendly, fatherly person. But this guy is so ready to see people burn. Catherine's 2 ladies in waiting were Kat and Ellen, so Catherine Willoughby and Ellen Brown, played by Ruby Bentel and Bryony Hannah. Ruby Bentel, she was in The Serpent Queen, she's one of Catherine's ladies in waiting, so maybe she should have just cooked up a poison for Catherine to use on Henry. It took me a while to recognise her. I was like, I've seen you before, I've seen you before, I've seen you before. Erin Doherty as Anne Askew, very good performance there. Yes, oh my god, Henry's children. I mean, granted, this is someone who has literally just come off of having to watch My Lady Jane, where all 3 of Henry's children were twisted and tainted and into unrecognisable characters, but these were such a breath of fresh air. You have Edward, he's this adorable little boy, like, kudos on casting him. He clearly looks up to the adults in his life. He looks up to his uncles, he looks up to Catherine, he looks up to Henry. But throughout the story, he's starting to see the real world for what it is. He's starting to see that not everything is as shiny and golden as he thought it was. And much like his counterpart in Becoming Elizabeth, this poor boy, he is going to get corrupted. I really need to do an Edward rankings at some point. Mary, oh my god. We've missed you, Mary. We've missed the real Mary. This Mary isn't babbling about burning heretics. This Mary isn't insane and trying to kill her siblings. It's clear that she has not yet found her assertiveness. Meanwhile, Princess Elizabeth, I think this movie was overall, it was Catherine's story, but it's Catherine's story being told from Elizabeth's perspective. this is probably the story she would have wanted for Catherine. The story where she didn't have to lose her independence to Henry and took her life in her own hands. So this Elizabeth sees all the bloodshed. She's in the room when Catherine is dragged out by the guards. There's a scene where she is sort of doing a biology lesson. She's dissecting a rat and like doing illustrations, and it is in the same scene where Kat and Ellen are preparing for the day and Gardner comes in to interrogate them. The entire scene is filmed with Elizabeth in the foreground while everything's talking in the background, and she's building with dread, but little by little she is sort of getting unafraid because she's gaining bravery, because she feels that I have nothing to lose at this point. You take away my stepmother, I have nothing to lose. I will say what I please. My father's going to kill me anyway. And in the scene where she stands up to Henry and Henry goes out and he's like, I'm so sick of my children, Mary says to her, like, you really shouldn't provoke him like that. It could be dangerous. And Elizabeth just turns to her and says, do you remember the last time you saw your mother? Or do you remember the last time you saw my mother? And Mary goes silent. And I think this is probably something that Elizabeth has said before to her, because Elizabeth says, I don't remember the last time I saw my mother. And I just thought, this film is ticking off everything I wanted to see on my Elizabeth wish list. I wanted Elizabeth to show that she is traumatised from literally her entire life because of Henry. She mourns a mother she never knew. She is desperate to cling on to the one mother she has. She resents her father, and that veil hiding her resentment is lessening. Thank you so much, Firebrand, for giving me an Elizabeth I actually wanted to see. And we all know Elizabeth as this fiery, assertive woman, so she is finding that fire and assertiveness in this film. There are other people in the court as well, like who are seen by name. There's the doctor who resents Henry but has to treat him. There's the lady-in-waiting who resents Henry but serves as Princess Mary's lady-in-waiting, and she's just waiting for Henry to die. There's Will Summers, and Will Summers is wonderful. We stan Will Summers. It's been a while since we've seen Will Summers, not since the Tudors, for like one episode. Because there is a bit where Gardner like very visibly goes off to talk to another courtier, and I dubbed that character Richard Rich. They don't acknowledge this character by name, but I'm just going to say that was Richard Rich, even if it doesn't say it in the cast list. That's the cast list. Let's talk about the costumes.
Never have intended for anything to stand between him and his people. Not a bishop, not a priest, not even a king.
Then you were bad.
Oh my god, the costumes are amazing. Please, more like this. I love these costumes. And they were so thematic as well. Becoming Elizabeth also had accurate Tudor costumes. I'm really hoping that this means we're gonna see more Tudor dramas with accurate costumes. Obviously it's not gonna last forever, but you know, there's gonna be a bit more dedication, because I think people just like historical costuming. They like learn how clothes worked back then. I do wonder how many costumes were made for the movie and also how many they managed to get from other dramas, because this green dress that Catherine wears, it looks similar to the one worn by Anne Boleyn in the David Starkey Six Wives documentary. So I wonder if that's the same dress or if it's like a close recreation of it. So the men mostly wear black, but you know, at least they're wearing hats. I think it's thematically in contrast to Henry and Catherine's wardrobe. Because Henry wears pretty colourful stuff. Like when he's appearing in public, he's wearing colourful doublets and hats, and Catherine also dresses in colourful colours. And I think there's always been a stipulation in these films, like, you know, we've seen previous Tudor dramas where rather than women wearing the accurate headgear, they are usually shown with their hair completely loose or braided and styled in some way. But this one shows these women very rarely are seen without their hair uncovered. Even when they're not wearing their gabled hoods and their French hoods, they're wearing caps or coifs on their heads. And I think that thematically adds into the idea of this restrictive environment that Catherine lives in, because she literally cannot let her hair down. She covers herself all the time. She is wearing like a sort of nightcap when she's in bed with Henry, but there is one scene where she is with Thomas Seymour where she removes the cap, her hair is still up and braided. But he's the one person she will reveal her secrets to, like, chef's kiss on that. Perfect costumes, honestly, and the pearls on the costumes actually look real. I've seen so many Tudor dramas, especially the 2003 Other Boleyn Girl, where when they're wearing pearls, they look plastic. You can see from a distance they're plastic, but ones on these dresses, either they're freshwater pearls or they've painted them in such a way to actually make them look like proper pearls. I love that attention to detail. The one thing against the costumes is that the fronts of Catherine's gowns, they look a bit too flexible, as if maybe Alicia Vikander wasn't wearing stays. I mean, there has been this whole debate as to whether actresses should wear corsets and stays under their historical clothing because they think it'll injure them. Like, corsets weren't originally designed to literally restrict and injure people. They were literally a way to support your boobs before bras were invented. So maybe Alicia Vikander wasn't wearing stays and it was like Emma Watson not wearing a corset in Beauty and the Beast as like trying to make a statement or something, I don't know. But the front of the dresses looked a bit too flexible. And that's my one grievance.
We would have to have their head cut off.
I'm sure you would come up with something much more creative.
Sometimes we think you know us better than we know ourselves.
I really do hope that Jude Law gets something out of this. Probably won't get nominated for the Academy Awards because of this very limited movie's release and the fact that it's being released now and the fact that it released at Cannes last year, so I'm not sure what the rules are on that one. But I hope he gets like some form of like BAFTA or something like that. So I do feel that this movie exists a lot more in the metaphor than literal world. Like a lot of the storytelling and the imagery is to sort of show the world in which Catherine lives, and like maybe having the court in the middle of nowhere, in the literal middle of nowhere, sort of shows how stranded Catherine really is. And the ending's a little bit bittersweet because Catherine will die a year later from childbirth complications, but if this is indeed Elizabeth's story and she's remembering Catherine as she wants to remember her, then yeah, it makes sense. How do I talk about this? It's sort of the story of Corsage, that movie Corsage about Elizabeth of Austria. That was also very inaccurate, and it showed her, rather than being assassinated, she sort of jumps off a ship at the end of the movie in the 1870s, even though she got killed in the 1890s. It's more to show this is the world they live in, this is how restrictive it is. They're trying to break free of it. If you keep restricting us like this, we will scream. And we will also strangle our husbands while they're on their deathbeds. But overall, I like the movie. I think, obviously, compared with some of the stuff we've had recently in the likes of the Stars series, the Gregory universe, and My Lady Jane, it's just, I would prefer if we could get Tudor dramas like this, obviously ones that are accurate in atmosphere, if not in storytelling. Granted, we all knew Henry was probably going to die by the end anyway, and Catherine was going to survive, but I really did not think that it was going to end like that. And I just thought, you know what, I've seen some pretty bad stuff recently that I'm going to let this slide, because this film definitely feels more like metaphor a la Spencer and Corsage and all that sort of stuff than it does as an actual proper historical drama talking about the events as they happened. I don't know how to round this off, because I really did like this movie. I encourage people to watch it while they still can, pun intended. I'm sure it will release to streaming eventually. For some reason at the Broadway in Nottingham it's only on for a week. Oh, there was one thing during the credit. It started filming Fireflies for some reason. We don't have Fireflies in the UK, so that sort of messed me up a bit. That's another slight criticism I had. I was like, we don't have Fireflies. I mean, I know you kind of wanted to show light in the darkness, hence Fireflies, but still. So watch the movie while you still can. You will get some great performances out of this. Some of the best we've seen of these characters in a very long time. Hopefully this will mean better Tudor dramas in the future. Fingers crossed. So that was my review of Firebrand. If there's an interview somewhere, or we'll get one in the future explaining why it took so long for this movie to be shown to the public outside of the Cannes Film Festival, nothing's going to be a good enough excuse, because we should not have waited this long. But anyway, I'm back, for the autumn at least. I'm going away in December again because I've got something lined up for over the Christmas season. If you haven't been in the loop, I was away in London for August up until the 25th, and then I came back with my mental health in tatters and my skin the worst it's been since I was in secondary school. I don't want to get into too much detail, but let's just say, if there isn't a Bible quote along the lines of, "Though thou be the shepherd, thy flock be not psychic," I'm sure there's something along those lines. But anyway, while I was away, I asked my patrons, what do you want me to cover as a one and done project next? And this will come out in October. It would have come out this month, but I suddenly became ill this month, and I just thought, I have too much going on right now, I can't be doing 2 different videos. So options were Mary and Margaret Tudor, Henry VIII's sisters. I would just include those 2 in a same project video because they have very limited representations. Mary Boleyn, Cardinal Wolsey, and Margaret Beaufort. And to my surprise this time, the winner was Mary Boleyn. So we're going back to the Boleyns. And if you are a patron or you're thinking of becoming a patron, now's a good time because I have a new poll which I will announce the winners of at the end of the Mary Boleyn video. So this is one that will come out in like November. So the options are Robert Dudley, which will be a one and done project, Edward VI, which will be a one and done project in and of itself, but I will also do a separate video about the Prince and the Pauper, Henry VII, another one and done project, and George Boleyn, and possibly Jane Boleyn, either included in the same video or given a separate one and done project immediately after George Boleyn. So think about which ones you want and sign up to become a paid member of my Patreon group if you wish to do so. And I must thank my patrons because they've been very patient with me while I've been away and recovering myself. There are some perks for becoming a patron, such as getting your name in the credits and access to my Discord. Higher levels will get you access to my scripts and early access to videos. And my King and Queen patrons get a shout out in the credits. Thank you Anna from Gustine, Annalise Barnett, Jill May Nero, Larissa and Leslie Williams. Okay, and remember to like, share, subscribe. Get me a boost back in the algorithm because since I've been away it went down again. Boost me up as much as you can please, it does make a huge difference for the channel.
I'm Henry VIII, I am. Henry VIII, I am. I've been eating since 6 a.m. For dessert I'll have dinner again. My name's synonymous with gluttony. I'll always eat a turkey or a ham.